There's so much stigma around issues with food, exercise, and body, and there's still so much that's misunderstood about disordered eating and eating disorders. This year, we decided to share our message with you through the voices of a mom, a doctor, and someone who has lived with and through an eating disorder, because they, along with our organization, are committed to increasing hope and access to care through a supportive eating disorders community.
I'm Jo Eichelheimer, and I'm the president of the board of directors for the Carolina Resource Center for Eating Disorders. I know firsthand what families experienced through my own daughter's eating disorder and continued recovery, and what this organization provides. With one death every 52 minutes from an eating disorder, CRC for ED services are vital. Eating disorders thrive in darkness, especially pronounced during these last few years with the pandemic. Eating disorders, however, lose their potency when we shed light on them. So we're committed to helping talk to folks, to support them in a safe community, and to provide hope. If you'd like more information for yourself or for a loved one, or if you'd like to provide support for our organization, please visit our website at crc4ed.com.
If you are struggling with an eating disorder, you do not have to keep it a secret or suffer in silence. There are people who understand the complexities of individual eating disorders and will support you in your next step towards recovery. Carolina Resource Center for Eating Disorders offers confidential services through their free helpline and virtual support groups. Please know that you can reach out and you will be received with compassion, respect, and empathy as you look for the support that you need. Contact CRC for ED at 828-337-4685 or email info@crc4ed.com.
'It's hard for me to imagine any greater pain than having a child who is suffering from the shame and isolation that comes with having an eating disorder. The antidote to shame is compassion, connection, and awareness. Carolina Resource Center for Eating Disorders helps provide that antidote through community education and advocacy, and through support services for those struggling with eating disorders. To learn about Carolina Resource Center for Eating Disorders, education, and support services, please visit their website at crc4ed.com.
Nine 9% of North Carolinians will have an eating disorder in their lifetime. Eating disorders are complex illnesses with genetic, biologic, psychological, social, and developmental roots. They come in all shapes and sizes and do not discriminate against age, race, class, gender, sexual orientation, or ethnic group. Carolina Resource Center for Eating Disorders is the organization I work with and trust to connect patients to resources, such as treatment providers and support groups. Eating disorders thrive in isolation, but you do not have to struggle alone. If you need help, please reach out at 828-337-4685 or info@crc4ed.com.
My husband and I were committed, after having gone through this experience, that we wanted to do everything possible to help other families who were in the same boat. And so it's important to me to give back and just to be there if people need to hear from another family who's lived through this, to be there for them, because we remember how hard it is and how frustrating and lonely it is if you don't know anybody who's gone through it. You feel like you're the only ones who ever have, which of course isn't true. And just to let them know that, yeah, like we hear you, we see you, and we're here to help any way we can.
Thank you for listening and for sharing the message of Carolina Resource Center for Eating Disorders. And know that when you come across someone who's struggling with disordered eating or an eating disorder, and you send them our way, they will be landing in a safe community of people who understand what they are going through. Hi, everybody. I'm Simone. I'm with Carolina Resource Center for Eating Disorders, and I'm co-presenting with Christy Maloney. There she is waving. She is on our board. She's a registered dietitian. She's an eating disorder specialist, and she volunteers her time for this. So thank you for being with us today. We don't have a ton of time together, so we're gonna fly through these slides as quickly as we can to give some time for some Q&A at the end in case there's anything you want to discuss. The other thing is, this is a wonky screen that you're seeing because I'm not putting it up to do as the presentation because I get messed up every time I do, so forgive me for that. And actually, before we dive in, we have a small enough group, so let's say hi to each other and just see who's with us. So let's start with Ariana.
Hi, my name is Ariana, and I work as the health coach and community class coordinator for Integrative Family Medicine of Asheville. And I might be turning off my screen at different moments to eat my dinner, but I am here and excited to be here.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, my name's Kira. I'm a school counselor at Art Space Charter School, so I work with kids kindergarten through 8th grade.
Great, thanks for being here.
Hi, my name is Eleanor. I'm a patient at Integrative, and I have definitely had quite a few friends who have suffered different eating disorders, and I just wanted to learn more about ways that I could support them.
Fantastic, thanks for being here.
Hi, I'm Julian. I have a daughter who has struggled with an eating disorder for the last 3 years. I'm also work at Mission, and I work with kids as well. So I see kind of both sides of it. And thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Suzanne?
I'm Suzanne Kirby. I'm on the board of CRC. I'm a retired psychologist in town and used to work a lot with eating disorders. So,
Thank you. Thanks for being here. I saw someone else try to log in, but then they bumped back out. So I'll let people in as they wish to join. So we'll start with, what are eating disorders? They are real life-threatening illnesses with potentially fatal consequences. They involve extreme emotions, attitudes, and behaviors surrounding weight, food, and size, and movement. And they're caused by a range of biological, psychological, and sociocultural factors. I like to start with the truths about eating disorders because we are actually still dealing with a lot of myths and stigma around eating disorders. So this just starts us out on an even playing field with what's really going on. Truth number one, many people with eating disorders look healthy, yet they may be extremely ill. You'll probably hear us say it a few times today. You can't tell by looking at someone if they're struggling with an eating disorder. Truth number two, families are not to blame, and they can be the patient and the provider's best allies in treatment. For a really long time, and it's still happening now, a lot of people blame the family. And while there's definitely a genetic predisposition that we talk about, and there's a 50 to 80% genetic predisposition with eating disorders, and while the environment can play a part, families are not to blame. And we need them. We need them to advocate for their family members and for themselves. Choose number 3, an eating disorder diagnosis is a health crisis that disrupts personal and family functioning. It disrupts the entire family unit. Number 4, eating disorders are not choices. They are serious biologically influenced illnesses. So I'm going to say it again. It is not a choice. We're still fighting that myth. Truth number 5, eating disorders affect people of all genders, ages, races, ethnicities, body shapes and weights, sexual orientations, and socioeconomic statuses, which you heard Dr. Pence say that in the video. Number 6, eating disorders carry an increased risk for both suicide and medical complications. And number 7, genes and environment play important roles in the development of eating disorders. But number 8, they don't alone predict who will develop an eating disorder. And truth number 9, full recovery from eating disorders are possible. Early detection and intervention are important. And for this one, it can take many, many years to recover from an eating disorder, and recovery is not linear, so there can be relapse. And it can take a very long time, but complete recovery is possible.
Okay, I'm going to jump in with the different causes of eating disorders. So we look at the biopsychosocial factors. So if we're breaking that out into the 3 parts, part 1 is the biological factors. This is what Simone was just talking about in terms of having a high genetic predisposition, also including family history, history of dieting, that kind of thing. So there's a little bit of nature and nurture in that. And then we think about people with type 1 diabetes can manipulate their insulin to lose weight, that kind of thing. That's called diabulimia. So those are the biological factors. The psychological factors are when people are struggling, excuse me, with things like low self-esteem, poor relationship with self, feelings of inadequacy. And then there tends to be other things that come along with the eating disorder, depression, anxiety, those kinds of things. Eating disorders typically do not exist alone in terms of diagnoses, and there's often other underlying things that's going with it, again, like the depression and anxiety, other personality disorders, OCD, rigidity in thinking, things like that. The last part are the social factors. So we look at that as the cultural norms that overvalue appearance. So for our society, we are looking at the thin ideal and how, there's a certain body type that's idolized. And that tends to be what people strive for. Because of that, somebody that does not naturally fit into that ideal, they could result in having body dissatisfaction. They can feel, again, kind of very poorly about themselves if they're unable to achieve that perceived ideal body type. And so that could be a trigger for someone developing an eating disorder. We also know that historical trauma goes in a lot of times with eating disorders. And then with our adolescents and kiddos, we can see weight stigma and bullying be an impetus or a trigger for eating disorders. Just because if a child is tired of being bullied for their weight or their size, it's kind of a natural thing to want to change that so they don't get bullied anymore. But that absolutely could be a trigger of an eating disorder.
Then add to that bubble social media.
Social media, yes. Yep.
Okay. So we talk about diets as a precursor because a lot of people don't understand that they are. And with 45 million Americans going on a diet each year, 35% of those do so on a regular basis. And of that group, 20 to 25% will develop an eating disorder. To me, that's a staggering number. And I just sit with it every time I talk about it because it's huge. 59% of those in treatment for an eating disorder considered prolonged dieting as the precipitating event to the onset of their eating disorder. When we talk about diet culture, We really want to emphasize this because part of this is just so ingrained in us, and it's part of our natural day-to-day living, that all of this information that comes at us all the time that we have to process, and we also have to deal with our loved ones with what to take in and what not to take in. It's important that we understand how insidious diet culture is and have awareness around it so we can start to be part of the solution and breaking some of this up. So Americans are dieting at the highest rate in history. $72 billion is spent annually in the diet industry in the US. And the reasons that we want to reject it is A, diets don't work. We know this. 95% of dieters will regain their lost weight in 5 years, and chances are they're going to gain more. Number 2, it's dangerous. Dieting can be a setup for losing touch with your appetite and following rigid food schedules and rules, and they can be a predictor for an eating disorder. So the losing touch with your appetite, we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but those internal cues, the hunger and fullness cues that we have, when we have messages coming from somewhere else telling us what to eat, how often to eat, what not to eat, all of these things, we stop listening to our body's internal cues. Number 3, there's nothing good about deprivation. Focusing solely on dieting narrows our sense of identity and encourages us to think of foods and ourselves as good or bad. Number 4, fat does not equal unhealthy. Healthy bodies come in all sizes and shapes. Weight stigma poses a threat to psychological and physical health. I'm sure we all know people who are in smaller bodies who are healthy and maybe unhealthy, and in larger bodies who are unhealthy and maybe healthy. And someone in a larger body does not mean that they're unhealthy. And number 5, to fight back, because you deserve to live a life free of pressures of diet culture. Diets encourage self-hate, and when we fight back against these societal ideals, everyone wins. You want to say anything about that, Christy? Because I know this is one of your passions before we go to the signs and symptoms.
No, I think that covers it. I think you covered it well. I'm sure I'll become impassioned here in just a minute, but you did it. So, warning signs and symptoms. Hold on, let me make my screen just a touch bigger. Things that we see, again, and not to harp on it too much, but a hyper focus on weight loss and dieting can be a warning sign. If somebody starts to have a limited range of preferred foods that narrows over time, so they might say, oh, well, I'm cutting out bread. Oh, well, no, I'm cutting out all starches. Oh, well, now I'm going to cut out all carbs. So over time, that sort of snowballs. An increase in concern about the health of ingredients. We see people a lot of times that have gone to kind of the extreme with wanting to eat healthy, to the point that it becomes an obsession and sort of like interferes in all aspects of their lives. We can see excessive rigid exercise and just like an inability to not engage in their exercise, creating like a large anxiety response. That would be a warning sign. And then for binge eating, we could see the disappearance of large amounts of food in short periods of time. And then there may or may not be some compensatory behaviors that go with that, such as self-induced vomiting, laxatives, diuretics, or excessive exercise. Other physical signs that we might notice are fluctuations in weight, both up and down, depending on if someone is restricting or binging. There could be some difficulty concentrating. You might notice that their skin looks really sort of like pale or ashy, kind of. Maybe their hair's falling out, that kind of stuff. We know for people that are struggling with a more restrictive type disorder, they might grow fine hair on their body called lanugo, and that's the body's attempt to like warm itself. When someone is not eating enough and maybe has lost weight to the point of being underweight, and their body kind of just can't keep itself warm. We might see poor wound healing in instances where someone is purging for a while and consistently, inconsistently, we might see their cheeks kind of swell up a little bit. It looks a little bit like chipmunk cheeks, and that's just glands that are swollen from purging repetitively.
And for a pretty comprehensive list of signs and symptoms that are broken out for specific eating disorders, you can go to our website. There's in-depth information on there. We're just going to not do that now because we have a lot of stuff we want to tell you.
Mm-hmm. So the first disorder we're going to talk about is anorexia nervosa. The definition of that is it's characterized primarily by self-starvation and excessive weight loss. This would include inadequate food intake leading to a weight that is too low. So too low of a BMI, below 18.5, a disturbance in the experience of body weight or shape, intense fear of weight gain, obsession with weight gain, and then persistent behavior to prevent weight gain, and an inability to appreciate the severity of the situation. So a lot of times when someone is struggling with anorexia, they don't have the insight to see how sick they are. And that's kind of the battle cry of eating disorders is, I'm not sick enough. And that especially plays out here a lot. The next one we're going to talk about, a disorder 2 of 5, is bulimia nervosa. It's characterized by binge eating and compensatory behaviors such as self-induced vomiting and an attempt to undo the effects of binge eating. So when we're talking about like what is a binge, it is frequent episodes of consuming very large amounts of food. But this one happens to be followed by self-induced vomiting, laxative abuse, or excessive exercise in an attempt to undo the effects of the binge eating. And typically for people that means they're trying not to absorb the calories. There's a feeling of being out of control during the binge eating episodes. And there's generally an extreme concern with body weight and shape. So very fearful of being, of gaining weight, of feeling that they're fat, that kind of thing. But actually, persons that struggle with bulimia are usually kind of at a normal weight. And you wouldn't be able to look at them and know that they're struggling in that way. The third disorder is binge eating disorder. This is characterized by recurrent binge eating without the regular use of compensatory measures to counter the binge eating. So this is that out of control, sort of frantic eating, eating when not hungry, eating to the point of discomfort, eating alone because of the shame about the behavior. As Joe mentioned in the intro, eating disorders kind of thrive in secrecy and darkness, and binge eating tends to be one of those because there is so much shame associated with that disorder for a lot of people. But it's the binge eating part of bulimia, but without the compensatory behaviors. So that's, kind of how we characterize that.
And just to add, everybody eats more than maybe they need sometimes.
Yeah.
So there's a big difference between binging and maybe overeating, or what you would consider to be overeating. And so with binge eating disorder, it's a disconnect. And quite often after a binge, someone will not realize what they had just done. And that's where a lot of the shame comes in, and why we might not hear about some people doing this as much, because the shame that's associated with it. There's a lot of hiding. But yes, everybody eats more than their bodies need sometimes, and there's nothing wrong with that.
No, absolutely not. It's a very normal thing to do on occasion, for sure. Yeah. The fourth disorder we're going to talk about is ARFID, and that acronym stands for Avoidant and Restrictive Food Intake Disorder. So this is what we would characterize as extreme picky eating. You'd sort of see a lack of interest in food, fears of negative consequences of eating, such as fear of vomiting, things like that. We see this a lot. It can happen in adults, but a lot of times it's in kids and adolescents. And a lot of times in people on the autism spectrum can have this because there are a lot of textural kind of things that come with this, textual aversions, that kind of stuff. And it presents a lot of times at first as like very picky eating. And when we see it, people might be down to safe foods that are like 3 or 4 different foods, and that's it. That's all they eat because there's such anxiety and fear. having other things for a variety of reasons, but they're really limited on what they can eat. And as you can imagine, that has some pretty significant social impacts that come with it as well. So yeah, lack of appetite or interest in food, with range of preferred foods narrowing over time. So it looks like getting pickier and pickier. The last subset of eating disorders is OSFED, which is other specified feeding or eating disorder. So these are ones that sort of have the characteristics of the other disorders, but they don't meet the exact criteria, even though we know these are still disorder behaviors. The first one of this is atypical anorexia. So that's when someone meets the criteria for anorexia nervosa, but their weight is not below normal. So the book we use to look at is, does someone have anorexia or not, has specific criteria for it. And if that person doesn't meet that criteria, but we know that they're malnourished and we know that they're not eating enough and we know there's fears there around food, they would still be classified as anorexia, but under this subcategory. Subthreshold bulimia and subthreshold binge eating disorder, both of those are, again, they don't quite meet the criteria for frequency, but we know that if binging and then potentially compensatory behaviors are happening, that is disordered, and that's kind of where that group is lumped in here. Purging disorder is purging without binge eating. Night eating syndrome is when there's excessive nighttime food consumption. So people that might get up in the middle of the night and eat, and they might remember, they might not remember, but it's sort of that middle of the night eating time, eating pattern. And then the last category is orthorexia, which is what I was talking about a little bit earlier, which is a harmful obsession with the quality or purity of food. So that's people that are very heavily focused on things like clean eating or eating only whole foods, to the point that it causes extreme anxiety to not have those things, and it limits their ability to go out, eat at restaurants, and be social.
I'm going to just take a pause. Does anyone have any questions before we continue on? Okay.
Actually, I do have a question.
Sure.
If I have a friend who has like illness that she's learning more and more about that slowly restricts her eating over time, as someone who's not a medical professional, are there ways for me to tell where the orthorexia might come into play versus this is just a learning process for her where her world does become more narrow and it's not a result of anything but circumstance?
I would say with that, I mean, honestly, if there's a concern that maybe, this illness that does come with true dietary restrictions because of the illness, if you worry about it veering into sort of orthorexia territory, one thing you might do is have a conversation. I'm sorry, my window's open and there's a very loud truck. You might have a conversation with her about, so what did your doctor, your dietitian tell you that you need to do, right? Like, let's go over the recommendations together and see like what that looks like, as sort of like an education and an accountability kind of thing. If you're worried, kind of past that, I would say that you might recommend that they meet with a dietitian just to kind of help suss out what's disordered and what's not, and get some very in-depth nutrition education there.
Thank you. That's super helpful. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Yeah, of course.
And it actually, this will tie into the next slide. So it was perfect timing for that question. So,
disordered eating or eating disorder. Many of us are familiar with anorexia, bulimia, binge eating. There's the typical signs and symptoms that we want to be aware of, but we also want to realize that there's a spectrum of maladaptive behaviors. So sometimes, people might be eating what we would call normally in intuitive eating. Then like a little past that on the spectrum, they might get into like some disordered eating. That's what you would see if somebody's like heavily preoccupied with dieting or clean eating, like that kind of stuff. That's before anything becomes diagnosable, is when we consider it disordered eating. When it veers into like the eating disorder, which is the other end of the spectrum, that's when we're seeing these diagnosable criteria. And people can go back and forth on that spectrum. It's not usually static unless they're kind of pretty eating disordered. But that's kind of what that looks like. And you have to remember that also eating disorders do not discriminate, and they come in all shapes and sizes. I'm going to shut my window real quick because the neighborhood kids are here. Hold on.
While she's doing that, I'll add to this. A lot of times, and this might also speak to your question, like a nugget that you can take away with you is if we look at what is the intention behind the behavior, and then what are the behaviors around it, and the intensity and the extreme level of behaviors around it. So if the intention behind is purely a health concern, and then there's doctor supervised and that sort of thing, that's one thing, right? And even that, I do agree, having a registered dietitian, someone who's ED informed, would be really important. Not just any dietitian, not that they're not talented, but eating disorders are very complex and nuanced, and working with a specialist is important. But again, looking at the intention behind it, and if the intention is possibly to change the size or shape of her body, or you can tell that there are some body image issues going on, that's where some of the flags come in. And again, what level, how extreme is it? Is it getting in the way of quality of life? And those are some really good things to use as guides for you as you're looking for someone who you care about.
Yeah, I had that very same conversation with a client today, and it's kind of like, okay, if you eat an apple, there's nothing inherently wrong with eating an apple. If you're eating an apple because you like a Granny Smith apple with peanut butter and it's amazing, that's fantastic. If you're eating an apple because you're scared to eat anything else because it doesn't feel safe, it doesn't feel healthy enough, you're eating the apple to the exclusion of everything else, then that's when it becomes disordered. So it's like Simone's saying, same action, right? Like different intent, and we want to parse that out. All right, so we're going to look at positive versus pathological nutrition. So when we think about positive nutrition, these are the aspects of nutrition that we really want to latch onto and that are helpful. So positive nutrition promotes health and successful physical functioning. It's health seeking through including nutritious foods. And I want to note there that it's including, it's not to the exclusion of everything else, but just inclusive of nutritious foods. It's motivated by a desire to live a healthy life, promotes a feeling of accomplishment and pride, yet allows for flexibility and unavoidable snafus. We know that positive nutrition is going to allow for all foods, and that's one of the core key components, is that all foods fit, and having that without anxiety, having all foods without anxiety. It allows for enjoyment of food as one of many aspects of a balanced life, and it promotes social interaction and relationships. The pathological side of nutrition, so these would be the parts that we really kind of want to watch out for and recognize as disordered, are when nutrition seeks health but deteriorates and impairs its functioning. So if somebody is super obsessive and rigid with food and very hyper focused on food, if they're doing it in health's sake, it becomes unhealthy when it's to that level of compulsion. It's health seeking through excluding unacceptable foods. So again, this is where we're excluding things that don't seem safe or okay. It's motivated by a need to manage anxiety. So if eating a certain food gives a person anxiety, then of course, as humans, we are averse to feeling anxiety. So they're going to avoid that food. And so that avoidance is anxiety management. Success depends on adherence to the food rules. Am I good or bad, or did I have a good day or bad day, is all dependent on, what they ate and if it stuck to what they thought they needed to do. It views food as a source of fear and danger that must be controlled, and it causes isolation and interferes with relationships. So this might be somebody that avoids going out to eat with family or friends because they don't want to have a meal out because they might not know exactly what's in it. So a non-diet approach. We were talking on Friday to the integrative health team about how this can seem a little utopian, but the idea is that you're probably not going to have all of these pieces together all at once because nobody does. But these are kind of the core components to a non-diet approach that you want to think about. So we want to notice hunger and fullness. We want to notice what our body's telling us in terms of how hungry I am, how full I am, and do your best to respond to those things. We know that emotional eating, for food and emotions, emotional eating happens sometimes for everybody, and that's not an abnormal thing. But we just want to make sure that there's other ways to manage emotions that aren't just food. We want to look at body image. When we talk about body image, we're looking at body image on a spectrum. So on one end of the spectrum, we have body negativity, and in the middle is body neutrality, and then on the other end is body positivity. It would be amazing if we all lived in a body positive space. But I think for most people, even people that don't struggle, with eating disorders and that kind of thing, we all have our days that we're not feeling so great. So if we're thinking about, having just body neutral thoughts, so an awareness of your body and appreciation for what it does, that kind of thing, maybe veering a little toward positive sometimes, that's where we want to live. We want to incorporate joyful movement. So that's the idea that we don't want to have rigid, obsessive exercise that we don't enjoy. So the idea of joyful movement would be finding activities that you like, that feel sustainable long term, and that bring you pleasure. So some people, it's kind of that, right? Like same action, different intent. Some people might love running a marathon, and that's their joyful movement. Some people like me absolutely would be being punished if I had to do that. So we just have to figure out, right? Like person to person, like what you enjoy and what's for you. We want to have regular eating, so consistent meals and snacks daily. We want to have pleasure foods. So that kind of goes into that concept of all foods fit. Yeah, of course, sometimes we want to have salads and we want to eat our veggies, but absolutely sometimes we're going to have French fries because they're the best food. And there's room for all of that. We want to slow down and savor. So this is really talking about engaging the senses of, how do things smell and how does it taste and what's the mouthfeel and, that kind of thing, and get a real enjoyment of food, because the enjoyment also is a key part of just satiety overall. And then other forms of self-care. So kind of going back to what I was saying about food and emotions, we don't want food to be the only thing that manage emotions. So we want to have a great arsenal of other self-care tools that, just generally help us feel good. All right, so informed education. So we're going to look at like intuitive eating, mindful eating, nutrition education, and kind of where this falls on this pendulum. So when we think about on this pendulum, on one side we've got restricting, on the other side we've got binging, and in the middle we have intuitive eating. So if we're looking down the left side, so intuitive eating versus dieting for weight loss. So intuitive eating is eating for physical rather than emotional reasons. And it's like asterisk, yeah, sometimes we're going to emotionally eat, but for the most part, you're responding to physical cues. You're relying on those internal hunger and satiety cues. You have unconditional permission to eat. It eases your mind, and you know that if at any time you're noticing signs of hunger, you have permission to respond to that. And it really kind of promotes body trust, and like just this sort of like innate knowing that your body knows what to do with the food and your body's going to take care of you. Mindful eating is eating with intention and attention. So basing it on hunger and fullness, pleasure, taste, texture, smell, and acknowledging responses to food without judgment, but with curiosity. Nutrition education is that is the really individualized component of everybody has different things that they might need to eat for, be it they're an athlete or they have diabetes or they have heart disease or they have PCOS, like whatever thing. People can have different nutrition needs, and that's okay. No matter what it is, we still don't want to label foods as good or bad or healthy or unhealthy, because again, that sort of like brings on morality that doesn't need to be associated with food. The goal in our little pendulum here would be to live in the red and purple areas. So on the restrict side, we've got full and restricting, we've got dieting, and then in the purple, we've got positive nutrition education. On the right-hand side, we've got binging, we've got careless eating, and then in purple, we've got pleasure and emotional eating. And then we have intuitive eating right in the middle. So the goal would be, again, to stay in that red purple space, because that's just really the space where a good relationship with food exists.
So, healthy movement and exercise. So, it's healthy if you're challenging yourself and you're engaging in a variety of activities that are just like what Christy said earlier, enjoyable and energizing. Are they life-giving? Or do they provide vitality? You balance your movement with rest. You wouldn't stress out if you missed a workout. You're healthy with your movement if you're flexible and adaptable, and if you'll modify if you're sick or if you have an injury. And while it can be an important part of your life, it's not the central part of your life. Movement becomes concerning if you're engaging in it to alter your appearance, regulate discomfort. Again, that's the bucket of other self-care tools that you might have. This can't be the only one. And that if you're using your movement for other intrinsic rewards. It's concerning if you prioritize it over other significant life activities. If you stress out, like I said earlier, if your workout is missed or interrupted. If you're feeling rigid about it, closed-minded, compulsive, anxious, if you'll train without rest or through an injury, and if you'll obsess over numbers and train secretly. The trackers are, they're just terrible because everyone's being guided by whether or not their little circle closes and whether or not they're successful that day or they weren't good that day or whatever it may be. Again, if same way that you're thinking about being mindful and intuitive about your eating, it's the same attitude towards your movement. Are you moving because it feels good and it energizes you? And maybe today I don't want to. Maybe today I want to take a gentle walk. Maybe today I want to kick butt on my Peloton. Whatever it is that day is okay, and it's not obsessive and it's not done in secrecy. The DSM-5, which is the book that Christy was talking about earlier, says that exercise is a problem when it significantly interferes with important activities, when it occurs at inappropriate times or inappropriate settings, or when the individual continues to exercise despite injury or other medical complications. So here's the body image spectrum that Christy was speaking about earlier. And again, just to speak to what she was saying, even with the intuitive eating element and that would be great if everybody could live there. And that would be great if everybody lived in the land of body positivity. What we want to go for is body neutrality, body respect, body acceptance. And if you love your body, great. That's great. And I hope that you get to stay there. I know I have days I don't like my body. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with me. My goal is accepting it and having respect for what it can do for me and that it takes me through my life. So, positive body image is having a true perception of your shape. It's celebrating and appreciating your natural body shape. It's believing that physical appearance says very little about your character and your values. It's positive body image if you're proud and accepting of your unique body. If you don't spend a ton of time worrying about food, exercise, and body, and there's nothing wrong with being concerned about what you're putting in and how you're treating yourself, it's just you're not obsessing about it, and you're feeling confident and comfortable in your body. It's negative if you have a distorted perception of your size or shape, and I'm sure we've all heard the word body dysmorphia. That's what this is. If you compare yourself to other people's bodies, if you believe that size or shape is an important indicator of your worth. Self-worth is pretty much at the core of an eating disorder. Feelings of shame, awkwardness, and anxiety about your body, obsessive thinking about food, exercise, and body, and believing that a size or shape can be a sign of personal failure. And this is a really cute little video that kind of drives this message home. There's a big problem at the center of our research on weight and health. What's the problem? Well, picture a society made up of dogs. Let's say poodles are the bossiest group. They're the ones you see down at the doggy park barking at all the other dogs about how to live their lives in order to be healthy. But the problem is, poodles think that every other kind of dog is just a really big, a really small, or a really fat poodle, when actually the other dogs aren't even poodles at all. They're terriers, or mastiffs, or greyhounds, or labs. And all of the thousands of different dog breeds have different lifespans and different health risks. Each one has evolved to use food differently for different specialties at surviving. Some for staying warm, some for running fast, and some for being strong. They're meant to be different sizes and weights. So the poodles think the mastiff should lose weight, but a starving mastiff never becomes a poodle. The poodles don't understand that dogs come in many more sizes than they can imagine in their poodle-centric ways. So this becomes a problem when it comes to poodle science. When the poodles did their weight and health research and made the claim that lighter dogs are healthier and live longer, they weren't comparing thinner poodles and fatter poodles. They were comparing poodles and mastiffs. So the recommendation for mastiffs to lose weight is based on the false assumption that if all dogs reach poodle weight, then all dogs will have poodle health. But once again, a starved mastiff just isn't a poodle. This poodle science doesn't even test whether a starved mastiff lives longer than a mastiff who has enough to eat, because one would have to compare mastiffs who maintain poodle weight to mastiffs that maintain mastiff weight. And it turns out that starving mastiffs regain weight, which after all is a much better thing than starving. But the poodles can only see that regain as a failure of mastiff self-discipline. Look, poodles are great, but poodle-centric health policy is a nightmare. Good science tells us that it's better to recognize and respect the ways we're different, because how we're treated, having good friends, having access to decent food, a place to play, restful sleep, and medical care make a huge difference in our health and longevity for all of us, whatever our size. So different ways to improve body image and self-esteem are avoiding comparisons of all types, not having negative self-talk, which we all do, but limiting that. There's a great exercise that we actually do this with kids, but it's great for adults, and I did it for myself and I love it. It's standing in front of the mirror and doing this day, a few days in a row, and really writing down the things that you appreciate about yourself, so that when you're having a bad day, a bad body day, you can look at this and you can have that resource to help you kind of come out of that frame of mind. And it's really great if it's not about appearance, like I have strong legs or I am really funny, whatever it may be. Reduce media intake that makes you feel negatively about your body, increases comparison or the idea that you're not enough. Cultivate the ability to appreciate your body, especially how it functions, what your body does for you. Treat yourself with kindness and respect. Challenge diet culture. Engage in behaviors and spend time with people that make you feel good about yourself. Wear comfortable clothes, so the clothes should fit you. You're not trying to fit into the clothes, and avoid the scale and don't talk about weight. We talk about language and that it matters, but I want to give the caveat that I don't want to say don't and do and go with the don'ts and you feel like I'm afraid to say something because I want to make a mistake. We would rather you say something and make a mistake than not say anything at all, because again, eating disorders live in secrecy and we really need to help shine the light on it. So what we don't want to do, though, is make rules or promises that we can't uphold, give simple solutions. So if you're looking at someone and you're like, just eat more, or you should just make smaller portions, like those things don't work, especially with someone with an eating disorder. So please just don't do that. Don't give advice about weight, exercise, or appearance. And don't ignore or avoid the situation until it's severe or life-threatening. What we want you to do is learn as much as you can what you're doing today. Be honest and vocal about your concerns. Be caring and firm. Firm is key here because when someone's struggling with an eating disorder, the eating disorder has convinced them and they are going to convince you that they are fine. They've got it under control. So really just sticking to it and being firm with your concerns is very important. Suggest that they seek help and be a good role model. Practice what you preach. This one's important because someone with an eating disorder is watching every single thing you put in your mouth and how you move your body. And a lot of times there's that comparison factor. So just, be a good role model. All foods fit, move for joy. Watch out for the appearance ideal. Don't provide tips or play the numbers game. Another nugget you can walk away with, if it's a number, just don't use it. Don't talk about weight, size, calories. Anything that has a number is really triggering, and someone with an eating disorder is going to hook onto that. And please emphasize the seriousness of an eating disorder, but don't portray it to be hopeless, because there is hope. And then what you want to know is where to go to get help. You have Integrative Health, which is they're doing a great job with their team. You can go to friends, teachers, parents. We work a lot with coaches and school counselors. And you can come to CRC for ED. We do this education. We do community outreach and professional development. We have our free helpline. We have free support groups. We have free clinical assessments for folks that have barriers to care. And we're really like the hub in North Carolina for not just people, individuals and families, but for professionals and healthcare providers, and just connecting those dots and getting anyone where they need to go to get help.